And now it is time for the last word with the great Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, Lawrence.
Good evening, Reginald. And there it is. There's the two shot. I think this is a historic. It's a historic handoff. We're in the same place for the first time ever.
Yeah.
This is the glory of the LA studio.
We were going to do sort of a
boxes.
magic of television, make it look like we weren't in the same studio. Look at that.
But no, we just went with the truth. You're right there, almost a handshake away. And if I didn't have a cold, we would reach and do that.
Achoo. So
I'll see you tomorrow at this Politicon thing, which I've never been to. I don't know what I'm getting into.
Yeah. But bring your nerdiest nerdism, because it is a political nerd paradise. It's a lot of fun. It's like Comic-Con, but we don't have to dress out.
I have to go.
And some people wear like powdered wigs. If you really want to dress as George Washington, some do. It's a con. Feel free.
All right. I will see you there.
See you tomorrow.
I'll be dressed up as this.
Sounds good. Have a good show.
Thank you, Joy.
Bye-bye.
Well, today, the dictatorship that calls itself the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia insulted the world with its written explanation of how Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi was murdered inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Here is the intelligence-insulting written statement by the Saudi dictatorship, a statement which in and of itself is an offense against decency and humanity. Statement says, the results of the preliminary investigations revealed that the discussions that took place with the citizen Jamal Khashoggi during his presence in the consulate of the kingdom in Istanbul by the suspects did not go as required and escalated negatively, which led to a fight between them and the citizen Jamal Khashoggi, which aggregated the situation and led to his death. May God rest his soul. In addition to their attempt to conceal what happened and to cover it up. While the investigations are still ongoing in the case with the 18 detainees of Saudi nationality, the kingdom expresses its deep regret at the painful outcome and stresses the commitment of the authorities in the kingdom to bring the facts to the public, as well as holding all those involved and bringing them to justice by referring them to the competent courts in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Now, here is a picture of Jamal Khashoggi. He is obviously physically incapable of being involved in anything that could be called a fight with 15 Saudis who flew into Istanbul specifically to grab him when he walked into that consulate. Jamal Khashoggi was obviously physically incapable of putting up 1 second of physical resistance to anything any one of his murderers chose to do to him. Escalated negatively. It's hard to even call this language a lie. It is something far beyond a lie. Jamal Khashoggi was incapable of escalating any violence against any of those people who murdered him. Not for 1 second. The statement says the fight between them and the citizen Jamal Khashoggi, which aggregated the situation, led to his death. Apparently, they mean to say aggravated the situation. This poisonous, murderous dictatorship, which lives in its own bubble, believes it could send those words out of the bubble today. And somewhere in the world, they would be accepted, that someone, somewhere, could accept the idea that Jamal Khashoggi aggravated the situation and that led to his death. Saudi Arabia does not have anything that the real world would recognize as a court system, but the Saudi Arabian dictators believe they could put out a statement today saying that this case could be handled by, quote, the competent courts in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. There is no such thing. There has never been a competent court in Saudi Arabia. There never will be, as long as the dictatorship is in place. And so who in the world would believe anything in the Saudi statement today? Who would believe that Jamal Khashoggi was capable of aggravating the situation that led to his death? Who would believe that Saudi Arabia has competent courts? Who in the world would believe anything in that statement?
I think it's a good first step. It's a big step. It's a lot of people involved, and I think it's a great first step.
That's Donald Trump in Arizona tonight, in a meeting with defense contractors, when he welcomed this big first step that the Saudi Arabian dictators have made by issuing this statement that is a lie from start to finish. It was as if a scriptwriter had placed him in that setting today, in the movie of the madness of Trump. There he is, sitting with the defense contractors who contribute to his campaign and who want to do business with Saudi Arabia, and he updates the defense contractors on today's news.
Saudi Arabia has been a great ally, but what happened is unacceptable. We are going to see they've arrested, just for the people at the table, a large number of people having to do with the event that took place in Turkey and the consulate, the Saudi consulate. And it's a big first step. It's only a first step, but it's a big first step.
Leading off our discussion now, Josh Lederman, national political reporter for NBC News. Also joining us, Ambassador Robert Jordan, the former U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia from 2001 to 2003, and Jeremy Bash, an MSNBC national security analyst and former chief of staff at the CIA and Defense Department. And Ambassador Jordan, I want to get your reaction first to the Saudi statement today.
Lawrence, I hardly know what to say. If it weren't so tragic, I would recall the famous words of Sergeant Schultz: "I know nothing, I'm not here." It's absolutely astonishing that they would come up with this incredibly lame story. I think if there was a fight, it was probably Jamal Khashoggi fighting for his life as they were chopping off his fingers. But that's the closest thing to a fight I could imagine. It is absolutely outlandish. It's just astonishing that they have come up with this.
Ambassador, you served as George W. Bush's ambassador to Saudi Arabia. You were there after 9/11 until 2003. If President Trump had asked you to return to Saudi Arabia as ambassador, if you were ambassador there tonight, what would you have said today in Saudi Arabia?
Well, the first thing I would say to President Trump would be, our ally in this is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It is not Mohammed bin Salman. And I think you need to depersonalize this. We definitely need an alliance with a country like Saudi Arabia in the midst of a very rough neighborhood in the Middle East. But I would caution him against blindly listening to anything these people say. I'll give you an example. When I arrived in Saudi Arabia after 9/11, one of the first things I did was to go to Prince Salman, then Prince, now King Salman. And I asked him, how could it be that 15 of the hijackers on 9/11 were Saudis? And you know what he said to me? He said, oh, no, there were no Saudis involved in this whatsoever. These were the Israelis who did this. This was a Mossad plot. And that was the line right then that he was trying to give me. And it made me realize that you can't take at face value any representation they make. Thankfully, we had more cooperative heads who worked with us at the time. But this King Salman absolutely was in outer space then, and I think this government is in outer space right now.
Let's listen to President Trump tonight when he's asked the question, do you consider this explanation by the Saudis to be credible? Let's listen to this.
Do you consider it credible, their explanation?
I do. I mean, it's early. We haven't finished our review or investigation, but it's, I think it's a very important first step, and it happened sooner than people thought it would happen.
Jeremy Bash, Donald Trump saying he takes that written statement to be credible. There are so many things to take apart in it, but one thing that's kind of special for Donald Trump is he and his Republican friends have spent years screaming about Sharia law, screaming about the kind of courts that they have in Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia says at the end of that statement, which Donald Trump now finds credible, is that their competent courts are going to take care of this.
Yeah, Lawrence, I don't think that we are any closer to the truth tonight. And I think the United States has to conduct its own investigation of what happened. And I think we have to rely on our investigative authorities, but also our intelligence and our intelligence community. And the truth will come out because the Congress of the United States, as part of its oversight of intelligence, will ask the intelligence community, including our main agencies, what do we know about what happened? What do we know about this story that's being put forth tonight? What's fact? What's fiction? And I think the Congress, in short order, is going to well understand a lot more than we are being told at this hour.
I want to go to one more thing that the president said tonight, because there is this just perfection about the setting that he was in tonight, sitting there with defense contractors, the defense contractors who contribute to his campaign, the defense contractors who want to do business with Saudi Arabia. No matter who they kill, no matter who they behead, no matter who they torture, they're ready to do business with them, and so is Donald Trump. Let's listen to what he said about continuing to do business with Saudi Arabia.
On defense, we have $110 billion, and I would say almost 100% of it would be sitting right around this table. I don't want to look over and tell Marilyn or Dennis, by the way, we're going to take $25 billion worth of sales away from you, because that would mean a lot of jobs. It would mean a lot of everything. I'll be working on this with Congress. Congress is very interested in this one, and we'll be working with Congress. But I would prefer that we don't use as retribution canceling $110 billion worth of work.
Josh Lederman, in other words, he would prefer there be no retribution whatsoever, absolutely no price for Saudi Arabia to pay for this.
Certainly not when it comes to arms sales. That's not really that surprising, I guess, because the president was very forthcoming about this even before the Saudis came out with their explanation. He said he didn't want to take that step. But here's what's so alarming about what we've learned tonight, Lawrence. Let's just, for the sake of argument, assume that everything that the Saudis said tonight is the God's honest truth. We're all talking about how incredulous their story is, but let's assume it's true for a second. That means that the Saudis, by their own admission, had their intelligence services send a team to a foreign country into a consulate to lie in wait for one of their own citizens to conduct an extraordinary rendition, got in a fight with them, killed him, and then conducted a cover-up to dispose of the body in some type of undisclosed fashion, while the Saudi government continued to tell the world for 17 days that he was alive and had left the consulate. None of that is even remotely acceptable behavior by international standards, even if what the Saudis are saying tonight were true.
Ambassador Jordan, would you expect for Saudi Arabia to have anything that would resemble a public trial, a public airing of evidence against the people who they're currently detaining?
No, absolutely not. It'll be conducted in secret. There may be a sentence handed down, perhaps even a death sentence. And then it wouldn't surprise me a year or two later, after they stay on death row, you quietly hear of a pardon, clemency granted perhaps during Ramadan by the king.
Jamal Khashoggi's editor at the Washington Post tonight tweeted this. She said, Khashoggi was a 60-year-old man. What sort of equal fight would he have had against 15 other men? And who brings a bone saw to a discussion? The stupidity of the Saudi explanation is mind-boggling. And Jeremy Bash, that stupidity, Donald Trump has said tonight, he finds believable.
And the big question, Lawrence, really is whether the U.S.-Saudi relationship. Because although obviously Mohammed bin Salman bears sort of personal responsibility at this hour for what is happening in the kingdom and for how the kingdom is communicating with the world, there is no alternative to Mohammed bin Salman. It's not like the United States could snap its fingers and say we want somebody else in that vital role as leading that country as the heir apparent to an octogenarian king. So there really is nobody else. And so the United States is going to have to decide over the next months and years how and whether and the extent to which to rely on Saudi Arabia to pursue American interests, to be a counterweight to Iran, to be a counterweight to al-Qaeda and ISIS, to be involved in diplomacy involving Syria, involving other areas of the Middle East that are vital to our interests. I think we're going to have to work with Saudi Arabia. We're going to have to figure out a new way of doing so after this incident.
Josh Letterman, we're hearing, as we have in the past, some noises from Republican senators objecting to what's happening and objecting to what the Saudis are saying. But it's hard for me to believe that there are any Republicans in Congress, and I mean any, in the House or the Senate, who would actually actively conduct hearings of any kind of investigation of any part of this, as long as the Republicans have that power.
It's a good question. There are two senators who are on the Republican side who have been pretty outspoken about this in the run-up to this evening. That would be Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham. And they have really pushed for a hard line, a hard response. There's been discussions about things like trying to block any future arms sales, cutting off discussions with the Saudis about a civilian nuclear agreement, what's known as a 1-2-3 agreement, and other steps to try to create some distance from this government. But certainly if the president heading into an election is talking all about the jobs and the money that's coming into this country as a result of these massive Saudi arms deals, it is difficult to see how Republicans en masse try to oppose him on that and don't eventually go along with essentially maintaining some version of the status quo.
Josh Letterman, Ambassador Robert Jordan, and Jeremy Bash, thank you all for starting this important discussion tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And when we come back after this break, we have more breaking news. Today, the Justice Department issued its first criminal charge against a Russian for interference in our current election, the 2018 election that's happening right now. And later, why the Houston Chronicle, which endorsed Ted Cruz in 2012, says it's time to get rid of Ted Cruz and bring in Senator Beto O'Rourke. An editor from the Houston Chronicle will join us. In this election year of 2018, Donald Trump has continued to tell the lie that we have nothing to worry about when it comes to the possibility of Russia continuing to interfere in our current 2018 election.
Is Russia still targeting the U.S., Mr. President?
Press, let's go. Make your way out. No, you don't believe that to be the case?
Today, the Trump administration, Office of the Director of National Intelligence, warned that it is very concerned about, quote, ongoing campaigns by Russia to interfere with this year's election and the next presidential election. And just as the Trump administration Director of National Intelligence was making that announcement, the Trump administration Department of Justice announced charges against a Russian for conspiracy to defraud the United States by interfering with this year's election. It is the first criminal charge by the Justice Department against a Russian for interference in this year's elections. Prosecutors say that Elena Kusayanova, that's the best I can do in that particular reading, waged, quote, information warfare against the United States of America. According to the criminal complaint, Russia continues using fake accounts on social media to, quote, sow division and discord in the U.S. political system, including by creating social and political polarization, undermining faith in democratic institutions, and influencing U.S. elections, including the upcoming 2018 midterm election. These federal criminal charges were not brought by Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller, who has been investigating Russian interference in the 2016 election. The case is being handled by the Cyber Division of the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of Virginia and the Justice Department National Security Division's Counterintelligence and Export Control Section. The woman charged is believed to be in Russia now and so has not been apprehended by U.S. authorities. Prosecutors say that she has been acting as the chief accountant for the criminal Russian operation intended to interfere with our election, and that the operation was funded by a Russian oligarch who is a close associate of President Vladimir Putin. The Russian Foreign Ministry had no comment today on the criminal charges, just no comment. When the President of the United States was asked about the criminal charges, he threw back a bunch of words at the reporter who asked the question, including the words Hillary Clinton, but all of those words amounted to simply, I don't care.
Today, the Justice Department unsealed an indictment against a Russian national who's accused of trying to influence the election in 2018.
Nothing to do with my campaign. You know, all of the hackers and all of everybody that you see, nothing to do with my campaign. If they're hackers, a lot of them probably like Hillary Clinton better than me. Now they do. Now they do. But, you know, they go after some hacker in Russia and they say, oh, But it had nothing to do with my campaign.
Would you have any warning to Russia or other countries or state actors that would try to?
I've already said it.
Joining us now, Ken Delaney, an intelligence and national security reporter for NBC News, and MSNBC political analyst David Corn, who is Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones. And David, as the author of Russian Roulette, of course, you've been studying this closer than most of us. The president continues to deny that there's any problem. There's certainly no ongoing problem with the Russians interfering in our election. But the Trump administration still seems to be doing the work of going after the Russians interfering.
What was stunning about this criminal complaint, it's not officially an indictment, that was released today, 38 pages, was a level of detail about the Russian attack on the United States. This is the same conspiracy, the same scheme that attacked the United States in 2016. This woman is an accountant for the organization, some of the businesses that funded that work. But what was really, I think, the significant aspect of the criminal complaint was it said this is continuing today. So the same operation that was in place in 2016 and shaped and influenced the election in a way that benefited Trump, that was designed to benefit Trump, according to our intelligence community, is still ongoing, and as the complaint said, continues to this day and is aimed at the 2018 midterm elections. I mean, this is like hair and fire type of stuff. Too bad it was on a Friday afternoon, but it really should set off sirens, alarm bells, anything that the same guys who did this successfully in 2016 are at it and trying to do it again with the midterms. And you see how the president responds? Well, let's see if anybody on the Republican side in Congress gives a damn about this. I'm not sure I'd take that bet.
Ken Delaney, what do we make of the fact that this is not a Robert Mueller prosecution?
Well, I think this is part of a larger Justice Department strategy to go after this behavior, to expose it to the world. But we should make no mistake, prosecution is a useful tool here, but it's not a substitute for a whole of government strategy to take on this stuff, and we're not seeing that at all. Donald Trump is benefiting from this Russian information warfare operation. Very clear. That's been going on since 2014. We didn't know about it back then. We know about it now. He's benefiting, and he's not denouncing it. And other parts of his government are doing, as far as we can tell, very little about it. Now, the Justice Department has decided that they're going to bring criminal charges, and they've released a lot of really detailed intelligence information in this indictment. They've shown these Russians that they're in their networks. This is NSA hacking exposed here in this indictment. But this woman is never going to face criminal charges, and right now we have very little defense against this manipulation of American public opinion.
And David Corn, one of the things they've discovered is of course, in the Russian invasion of our political discourse this season, one of the things they're doing on social media is attacking Robert Mueller.
Yes. I mean, the Justice Department in its press release tried to play this even and said that there was no real ideological bent to what the Russians were doing. They attacked Democrats and they attacked Republicans, but all the examples, not all, most of the examples in the criminal complaint show that they're really out there to help Trump and the far right, and that includes dissing the Mueller investigation. Yes, there are a few accounts, a few Twitter accounts, a few Facebook accounts that say things that would be in keeping with a liberal response. But again and again, it's attacking Republicans and Democrats who don't support Trump and also attacking Robert Mueller. It's clear they want to help Trump as we get into the midterm elections.
And Ken, what about the fact that the Justice Department ran this one in the kind of the place where this kind of investigation would have occurred if there had never been a special prosecutor's office?
Well, I think that's good news that the Justice Department is actually attacking this. But let's not forget what exactly we're talking about here. This was a $35 million operation, incredibly sophisticated. These are people in St. Petersburg, Russia, taking on U.S. personas on Facebook and Twitter. And if you read through this indictment, they had a very sophisticated understanding of American politics, where the fault lines are in NFL protests, LGBT rights, gun rights. They really, and you know, we're already divided. They're just throwing a match on dry tinder here. And it's very effective, and I'm not sure that we have any defense for it at this moment.
What would you expect to happen in this case? The woman is apparently in Russia, so there's not going to be extradition. We're probably not going to ever get to a trial in this. So what was their point in putting this out there today?
to send a message to the Russians that they have exposed this conduct and to build public awareness about it. And frankly, we're not sure, why do they charge only her and not other people? Does she have a villa somewhere? She now cannot travel to any country where the FBI could snatch her. So there's somewhat of a penalty to be paid here, but it's mostly a naming and shaming kind of thing, and also building public awareness so people can see what these Russians are doing.
Ken Delaney and David Corn, thank you for joining us in this discussion. And when we come back, is there anything that Republican elected officials fear more than democracy?
It is possible to win, but it's not going to happen automatically. It's only going to happen if we put in the work, if we canvass, if we phone bank, if we text bank. And that's what I'm seeing indivisible groups all over the country do.
And David Corn, what Democrats are seeing is that there are new challenges every day about how to enable people to vote. Now, presumably in Kansas, they're going to have to come up with some sort of transportation system to get people to that single polling place.
You know, we can put this in the grand historical sweep. For 153 years, ever since the end of the Civil War, it's been the top agenda of racists in the South and elsewhere to try to stop African Americans from voting. And we've seen it again and again and again. Now they're a little bit more subtle than they used to be, but still what Dodge City is doing by not having a single voting place within the town limits, not a single voting place that anyone can even walk to or ride a bike to, putting it all outside. I mean, that's about as transparent as it gets. What they did in North Dakota when they said, unless you have a street address, you can't vote. Well, if you're a Native American living on a reservation, and we know the history there, well, you don't always have a street address. So right away, thousands of Native American citizens are not allowed to vote. I mean, these are not very subtle things. And when you have the Secretaries of State, and where is it, in Georgia, Ohio, and Kansas, all involved in these controversies, and many of them running for office themselves, you know, it does get rigged. And I think the way to, what Ezra said is right. People can't let that put them off, but they need to get mad and realize that people don't want you to vote. And what's the best way to fight back? By figuring out how to get to the voting place.
American Public Media is reporting that in a single day, more than 500,000 people, 8% of Georgia's registered voters, were cut from the voter rolls. For an estimated 107,000 of those people, their removal from the voter rolls was triggered not because they moved or died or went to prison, but rather because they decided not to vote in prior elections. And Ezra, that is your right, is to decide not to vote. And purging those rolls has never been. It's never happened before that if you miss an election, you will surrender your right to vote.
No, it's happening because the Republicans in Georgia think they might lose, and so they're not playing fair. And look, there are great organizations working in Georgia and elsewhere to ensure that these voters can indeed vote. Black Voters Matter is doing great work in the state, as well as many other groups. We need to be supporting those groups. But look, we can't take the sitting down. We've got to get out there, get our voters to the polls, make sure that democracy actually functions, because it is a participatory sport. And look, part of the battle is for the 18 days from now. We need to get people out to vote. In some cases, democracy is literally on the ballot. People are voting for re-enfranchising returning citizens. People are voting for automatic voter registration. There's a great volunteer effort in Michigan trying to get nonpartisan redistricting passed. There are places where we can vote to protect and expand American democracy. And even if it's not on the ballot, even if you're not voting on that specific issue in your state, there is an opportunity if Democrats take the House, the Senate, state legislatures, governorships. They should embrace democracy. We should see Democratic leaders coming out for automatic voter registration, for making voting day a national holiday. There is no reason why in the 21st century we should be operating on 19th century democratic institutions. Let's improve democracy. Democrats have a political opportunity. And when I travel around the country visiting with groups in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, or Beaumont, Texas, or Prescott, Arizona, what I hear from the indivisible groups on the ground there is they want these reforms. That's what they want to see their elected officials do when they get into office in January 2019.
David, before we go to break, we just have a moment for a quick word about these stunning polls. A tie in the governor's races in Georgia and Kansas.
Yeah, I mean, but look, we have gerrymandered districts. We have these rigging, voting repression methods. The way that the Republicans are trying to hang on to power in this country while demographics are aimed against them is by coming up with these, phony and fraudulent and anti-democratic methods. That's what they have to do. So if it's that close, anything you can do to repress 50,000 votes, 10,000 votes, even 500 votes could make the difference. And that's why they're doing it.
Ezra Levin, David Corn, thank you for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And up next, a very big endorsement in Texas for Beto O'Rourke for United States Senate.
So how about saying your opinions on some of the other people running for the highest office? How about Ted Cruz?
Lucifer in the flesh. In Washington, I have many Democrat friends, and I have Republican friends, and I get along with almost everybody. But I have never worked with a more miserable son of a...
Joining us now, Evan Mintz, Deputy Opinion Editor for the Houston Chronicle. Evan, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And this editorial is extraordinary to me for a couple of reasons. One, you're the same newspaper that endorsed Ted Cruz for the United States Senate 6 years ago. I don't think I've ever read more disappointment by an endorsing newspaper in the office holder who they endorsed.
Well, the whole process really was guided by something that Kay Bailey Hutchison told us back in 2012 as she was the outgoing senator. She said that being the senator from Texas is a little bit like being the parent of a teenager. There is always something you have to deal with. And if you're representing a smaller state, Kentucky, Idaho, you have a certain luxury of being able to go off on ideological crusades, and that's fine. But when you're representing Texas, it has to be 100% Texas. And like the parent of a teenager, we're not mad at Ted Cruz, but we are disappointed.
And on the positive side, when you're talking about Beto O'Rourke, you're making the case that even for voters who disagree with Beto O'Rourke, their state will get better representation by him.
Beto has this incredible ability just to go out to places where politicians haven't gone in years. He actually went and saw all 254 counties in Texas, and he listens to people, and he creates these sparks of civic engagement where folks who have never really talked to each other but live in the same neighborhoods discuss what they want the public to be like and what they want their government to be like. And he goes and he listens and he brings that up to Washington. And I think that's something that will really benefit people no matter where you are on the political spectrum.
And when you go back, when you're looking at Senator Cruz and considering how he failed the state, what would you say were the principal ways in which Ted Cruz made it impossible for you to endorse him?
Well, Senator Cruz is incredibly smart. He's a smart man. He is ambitious, and he has political skill. And we saw him use that, for example, in 2013 when he shut down the Senate over Obamacare. But we get frustrated and a little disappointed when it comes time to work for Texas. For example, after Hurricane Harvey, we were having difficulty getting a recovery bill through the House and then through the Senate. And we called on him, do what you did before, shut down the Senate and help us out, bring attention to this cause. And he did not do that. He fights for himself. He doesn't fight for Texas.
And we're going to be joined now by Ezra Levin, who was in our previous segment. He's a Texas native. And Ezra, one of the things that the editorial acknowledged is that Beto O'Rourke is running behind Ted Cruz in the polls, and that it is possible that the Houston Chronicle is not picking a winner this time. But what is your reading of what would need to happen on the ground for the O'Rourke campaign to win?
Yeah, Lawrence, you said it earlier. You know, I was 3 years old when Texas elected the last Democratic senator in 1988. So it is a tough state for Democrats. And that said, the campaign that Beto has been running has just been absolutely incredible. Indivisible did a big launch 100 days before the election for our electoral work. We were working with groups all over the country to run canvases and phone banks and text banks. And I actually went and did a road trip through Texas, visiting with groups who were then working to try to elect Beto, who is an endorsed candidate for Indivisible. I was in Beaumont, Texas with Golden Triangle Indivisible on a Friday night with groups of people that were doing what Evan just described. There was these bursts of civic engagement, people who had never met each other, but were coming together to try to get Beto O'Rourke elected. The next morning, that Saturday morning, I drove to Wimberley, Texas, not exactly a bright blue dot in Texas. So many people turned out for Beto that we ran out of doors to knock on. And one of the interesting things that we're seeing in Texas right now, and the Houston Chronicle highlighted this as well, is that, yes, Beto is lighting the political system on fire in Texas, but it's not even just him. There are a lot of very impressive congressional candidates, Julie Oliver, Sri Preston Kulkarni, and many other congressional candidates who are running honest, positive campaigns in this really negative, dark political climate, and they're attracting a ton of volunteers. So the answer to your question, what is it going to take to win in Texas? It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take doing that canvassing, doing that phone banking, doing that texting. So anybody who would like to see this supposed blue wave that's coming, it's not coming. It's being built drop by drop. If you want to be part of that, we have 3 weekends left. You got to sign up, find out where you're knocking on doors and making calls. And I want to say, this has actually become a little bit personal for me. My family is based in Texas. They're not really politically active. They haven't done any of this kind of campaign work before. And my sister, she is leading a canvass for Beto in Houston this weekend. So if she can do it, everybody watching right here, you can do it too.
And Evan, as you know, latest poll, CNN, of registered voters in Texas shows a 5-point gap between them, 7-point gap when you go to likely voters. And what has been the reaction so far to you, the paper endorsing Beto O'Rourke?
There's been a lot of excitement, a lot of traffic on our website, and some traffic in the air. Someone flew a plane over our building with a big banner that said, "No Beto, no to socialism," which is interesting because I'm pretty sure he's not a socialist. There are some socialists on the ballot, though. There's a socialist judge here in Harris County, and there's a lot of good other judges in Harris County, Republicans, Democrats, and I just want to take this opportunity to implore people, please read the endorsements. Don't vote straight ticket. Vote for quality judges, no matter whatever party they're in. If we knock out these incredible jurists, that hurts everyone.
I have to say, it's a really well-written and well-considered editorial, both on the Cruz side of the editorial and on the O'Rourke side of the editorial. It is really worth reading for everyone. Evan Mintz, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. And Ezra Levin, thank you also for joining us. Tonight's Last Word is next. Time for tonight's Last Word.
This is a guy you love.
I know all these things. I mean, I'm not a baby.
Yes. Okay? He's not a baby because a baby wets his own bed. Now, Trump... allegedly.
This week started with Donald Trump saying, "I'm not a baby" on 60 Minutes, and the week is ending with this Trump baby floating over downtown Los Angeles, marking the spot where Politicon is convening at the convention center tomorrow. And I'm going to need that Trump baby blimp to show me exactly where I have to go when I head down to Politicon tomorrow. That is tonight's Last Word.